Hello, everyone. Welcome to ODOT's webinar on the new Inspection and Inventory Bridge Manual. My name is Jared Bax from the Office of Structural Engineering, and over the next hour or so, I will be going through the overall layout of the new Bridge Inspection and Inventory Manual and talking about the main updates and changes to that manual per the 2022 NBIS and updated inventory from Federal Highway called the Specifications of the National Bridge Inventory, or SNBI. So our 2025 Bridge Inspection Inventory Manual was released on July 25th, 2025. It's been posted to the Office of Structural and Engineering webpage, which I will show you how to get there in just a minute. The key thing here is that this is a comprehensive update to both the Bridge Inspection Manual and the Ohio Bridge Inventory and Coding Guide. So most of you who are familiar, these used to be two separate documents. What we've done with this update is combine the old Inventory and Coding Guide into the Bridge Inspection Manual, which is why I keep saying now Bridge Inspection and Inventory Manual. So our two manuals are now combined into one for this 2025 update. That link below is for the Bridge Inspection webpage, which again, like I said, I will show in just a few slides. So overall, just a quick rundown of the manual chapters. Chapters 1 through 3 are relatively similar to our old inspection manual, but they have been updated per new NBIS and ODOT requirements. So chapter 1 is just an overall introduction. Chapter 2 is restrictions, which gets into load ratings, critical findings, etc. And chapter 3 is bridge files, basically what should you have in your bridge file. So again, those three chapters are in essence the same as the old manual, but they have been updated per current regulations. Chapter 4 is specifically on inspection types, and most of the content in this chapter is new and updated per SNBI. So please make sure you are reading and looking at the new chapter 4. This covers all of the SNBI inspection types. There are 9 in total, plus the Ohio cursory, Ohio only, safety or cursory inspection type for, non-highway bridges over our roadways, railroads, signage, conveyor belts, things like that. Basically anything that crosses our roadway that's not a vehicular bridge. What should we do for those inspections? Chapter 5, qualifications. This is an update of our previous chapter 5. So again, fully updated per the new NBIS regulations. There were a lot of changes in the 2022 NBIS for bridge inspector qualifications. These are all detailed there. So again, when you have questions about what type of training do I need, please consult chapter 5 of the manual first. The biggest change is for refresher training, which I will talk about later on in this presentation. Chapter 6 is a new chapter that covers quality assurance and quality control from a statewide perspective, and also the federal highway metrics that we must stay compliant with per federal highway, right? So basically it will cover, what ODOT, counties, and municipalities do for quality assurance and quality control. And then it will cover, federal highways metrics and what we expect all of our bridge programs to be compliant with. And then chapter 7 is quite the long chapter. This is the full SNBI and ODOT inventory. So the old, coding and inventory guide is now chapter 7 of the Bridge Inspection Inventory Manual. And chapters 7 to 10 of the 2014 manual have been removed. Have been removed. A lot of that stuff was kind of straight out of the Federal Bridge Inspectors Reference Manual, or the BIRM. So we've, instead of, rolling that over and kind of recreating the wheel, we just referenced the BIRM when applicable. So, like the big chapter 10 of the 2014 manual that talked about every single bridge element, that is no longer there, and in essence references the BIRM, all of that information, specific to, what are certain bridge elements, et cetera, can be found in the Federal Bridge Inspectors Reference Manual. And lastly, the chapters 8 and 9 from the 2014 inspection manual, which talked about, your 9 through 0 component ratings and then your element level ratings. Those are now found in chapter 7.2 of the updated 2025 manual. So the SNBI, right, as part of the inventory, it defines, condition rating fields, element level ratings, et cetera. So that's why we, kept that in chapter 7 with the rest of the SNBI and Ohio inventory. So before I get into the rest of my slideshow, I just wanted to show, where you can access this manual from the internet. So I'm going to leave my slideshow for just a minute and pull up the internet here. So what I'm showing now is our inspection and inventory page. Literally, if you don't have this page bookmarked, I would say you should. But if you don't, a simple Google search for, ODOT bridge inspection or Ohio bridge inspection, or even Ohio bridge inspection manual will, your first result will be, either the manual directly or this web page. So again, those of you who are, doing bridge inspection or reviewing bridge inspections on a daily basis, should have this web page documented, because this is our, public facing website where we can put, any guidance or documents that you all would need, right? So as a quick just rundown, we have, everything ASSA-wise here. This link, Manual of Bridge Inspection, we'll probably update that too, and inventory, but we haven't, fully sunsetted or removed the old inventory and coding guide yet. So this right here, this second link, Manual of Bridge Inspection, that is where the new bridge inspection manual can be found. So if we click on that, we just kind of have a little summary of the updates and how the 2025 bridge inspection inventory manual was revised. And then here's your download link here to the manual. So you click on that, and that will open the 2025 manual of bridge inspection and inventory. This is fully able to be used on a mobile device as well, which makes it very, very handy in the field. I would highly recommend, field inspectors, that have an iPhone or an Android. You can pull this manual up from your phone, and all the links and everything still work. I've been finding that it's a great tool in the field for looking up condition rating or element level rating guidance right there at the bridge. So as you'll see, and again, a lot of these points I'll talk about in my slideshow, but all of the table of contents is fully linkable, which very easy to jump around. So right, if you want to go right to chapter 3, click on the link, bottom of every page, you can return to the table of contents and choose a different section. So again, like I said, this all works on mobile as well. Links all still work. So a great way if you're out in the field to, if you want to quickly jump to our rating guidance section, right? Bridge condition rating. Here is all of that guidance, etc. So I'm going to get back into my slideshow now. But again, for people who are using this on a daily basis, please just bookmark either our manual of bridge inspection page or just this link to, to the bridge inspection manual itself. Okay, so basically what I will do during this presentation is I'm going to kind of go through the chapters 1 to 7 and kind of highlight the biggest changes from the previous manual that are in each one of those chapters, right? So chapter 1, again, is introduction. Ohio bridge is still a bridge, greater than 10-foot structure, right? I'm not going to touch on the things that haven't changed. But the big one that we have defined in chapter 1 is Ohio cursory bridge inspections. So some of you might know those as safety inspections. The official term that we are using going forward is cursory. And again, these are for non-highway bridges over highways. Basically, right, per Ohio law, we have to keep our roadways safe. So we inventory these structures as bridges, even though they don't carry vehicular loads. So again, right, we want to inventory and inspect these for safety and to make sure that, you know, vehicles beneath are not subject to danger, but also can, you know, fit through the opening of the structure, right, for permitting or oversized vehicles, et cetera. Since these are not national bridges, they're not NBIS bridges, we're not required to do SNBI inventory. I mean, we're not required to inventory these at all per federal law, but for Ohio law, we are. And so we've decided on an abbreviated SNBI inventory for these structures that basically is, you know, what do we need in our system, you know, location, clearances, overall condition ratings, et cetera. But again, right, we're only looking at that span over the roadway. So we're not looking at the entire structure most of the time. We're not doing a full routine inspection most of the time, right? So, you know, we've detailed which SNBI inventory fields we would like to see for these bridges on page 4 of chapter 7. So right at the beginning of chapter 7 in the new manual. And a lot of these, you know, fields, if you already had your cursory bridge in ASSA-wise prior to our SNBI transition, most of these required inventory fields have already been populated based off of the old NBI inventory. So there's not much to do, but again, other than, you know, check for accuracy. But when you are doing a cursory inspection or have a, you know, cursory bridge, chapter 7, page 4 is where you'll see what inventory is required. So importantly with these, and we'll kind of see this more as we talk about inspection types, but now that we have many inspection types, we want to make sure we're coding, you know, exactly what the inspection is in ASSA-wise, right? So cursory inspections, you know, should not be coded as SNBI routine inspections. We didn't have a better way to code them in our previous NBI inventory, but now we have, you know, multiple different inspection types we can choose. So again, like I said, if you know, kind of look at the picture of this railroad structure here over our roadway, you know, we're only concerned about that span over the roadway. We're not looking, you know, we're not getting up on top of this bridge. We're not looking at every span. So, you know, that cursory inspection does not meet routine inspection scope. So for these type of inspections, as you'll kind of see by the picture on the bottom, we don't want routine selected. We want, you know, just Ohio cursory inspected. And then, you know, just above BIE 1303 is where you'll add that date. One field that I know we need to add is cursory inspection frequency. So that will be added before next year's inspection cycle. So you know, kind of know per Ohio RBI if it's a 12 or a 24-month frequency. But, you know, important, you know, this is how we're going to be tracking these, right? You know, that Ohio cursory is selected and, you know, that cursory inspection date is filled out for these bridges. Next, we're kind of moving into chapter 2. A few updates, especially for critical findings, can be found in chapter 2 of the updated bridge inspection inventory manual. So we would like to touch on, you know, the main differences between, you know, or updates, I guess, since the 2014 manual. So a critical finding must be reported, right, when the deck, superstructure, substructure, or culvert, you know, condition rating, the 9 through 0, is lowered to a 2 critical. That has not changed. That's the same as it was in our last manual, right? So if in essence, if your GA is a 2, and, you know, that is new at this inspection, so you've lowered the rating to a 2, you need to fill out the critical finding form that is in ASSA-wise. A couple things that are new since the last manual for critical findings, and this the second bullet here is per federal highway. If any part of the on or under route is closed or restricted, we want you to fill out a critical finding, right? So even if you have something as simple as, you know, a poor railing where you're going to restrict the, you know, shoulder of that bridge, we would like to see a critical finding for that because you have restricted the roadway on top of the structure. So again, any part of the on route or the under route is either closed or restricted due to any circumstance. We want a critical finding filled out. So a common one we've been seeing on the state side, bridge impact. Overhead bridge is impacted by something on the under route. If we're closing, either the overhead or the under route because of that impact, it's going to be a critical finding, right? And the last bullet here is mainly for ODOT program managers, but when an incident happens where you are planning on using emergency funds, we would like to see that filled out as a critical finding as well. The second bullet point is very, very important and a new change with updated NBIS. If a critical finding occurs on an NHS route, so you have NHS route on the bridge or under the bridge, Federal Highway must be notified within 24 hours. That is a little hard to do in certain cases, depending on the type of issue at the bridge. So, if we've got, massive fires on a bridge or a massive, type of issue where, the important thing is making sure, the public is safe, please reach out to your, your QA manager. So, right, from a state perspective, we've already kind of told, the district engineers that, if you have a critical finding occurring on NHS on or under, please let central office know immediately. I know that the county and municipality systems don't have many NHS routes. I know you have some, but so just keep that in mind. If you have a critical finding on an NHS route, we need to notify Federal Highway. So we have a check in ASSA-wise that if you open the critical finding form and populate one of those first couple fields, it sends out an automatic email to Federal Highway. So again, if you open that critical finding form the first day that it's been discovered, Federal Highway is going to get notified. The issue that we've seen on a couple bridges, especially our major emergencies, is that the top priority isn't immediately filling out that critical finding form, so then it doesn't generate that auto-populated notice to Federal Highway, and then if we kind of forget to notify them, then within 24 hours we get dinged on our on the critical findings metric. So just keep that in mind about the NHS routes for critical findings. Again, if you open the critical finding form and populate it as soon as you are aware, or as soon as you go out and check the issue, then it will send that automatic notification to Federal Highway. But if you don't do that, or don't have, aren't going to do that immediately, please notify, either central office for state or turnpike structures, Mark Sherman for county structures, and Omar Buajar for municipal structures. A critical finding, right, can be filled out as a part of any inspection type, right? The critical finding form is standard in our, inspection form and ASSA-wise. So it doesn't matter if you're choosing, routine inspection type or damage or special, you can fill out a critical finding as part of any of those. And then this hasn't changed, but just want to remind everyone that, an inspection report containing the critical finding or a new critical finding must be approved within 2 weeks of discovery. So, even if that's a routine inspection where typically you would have 3 months, after the inspection to get that review done, if it's going to, if it contains a new critical finding, we want that, approved and reviewed within 2 weeks. So now talking specifically about the critical finding form, because I know there's been a little confusion on this. Down at the bottom of that form, we have fields 283, 284, 285, which is basically asking about, is the critical finding resolved, and asking for dates. So 283 and 284, is it resolved, and what is the date resolved? That pertains to the immediate safety concern that was identified, right? So, for example, if a bridge was hit and, the immediate remedy is to, close the bridge on top or close the route on bottom, and, we're going to leave it that way until we do something, that's, if you've taken care of the immediate safety concern, right? And so that's the date, we're looking for a yes there. Has that immediate safety concern to the public been taken care of? Not saying that this bridge is in its final, repaired state. We just want to know, has that, immediate safety concern been taken care of? That's the yes or no for 283. And then that date is when that happened, right? The 285 is when, the issue has been permanently resolved. So, if, for example, the critical finding was identified and the solution is to, this bridge will remain closed until it's replaced, okay, then it's fully taken care of. You can fill out a date in field 285, because this bridge will never open again until it's replaced. Basically, we like I have here in this in that last bullet point. So remain closed until replacement, or it is reopened with no restrictions or temporary shoring. So if a beam gets hit and we're going to heat straighten it or put a splice in and repair that beam, once that beam is repaired and the bridge is now open with no restrictions again, that's your date of permanent resolution, right? So again, 284, when was that immediate safety concern taken care of? Most of the time that is either the day or the days following immediately when a critical finding is identified. And then 285 is usually either weeks or months down the line, or it could be relatively close to discovery if the decision is made that this bridge will remain closed until replacement. Okay, so now getting into chapter 4, SNBI inspection types. So I'm going to run through some of the new SNBI inspection types and what's required with each, starting with initial inspections. So we had initial inspections before, but we didn't really have a great way to document them. We were probably just coding them as routine in the old NBI. So now that we have an actual checkbox for initial inspections, when do we check that box, right? And that is for brand new bridges, rehabbed or replaced bridges that are now opening to traffic, or when ownership changes. So when you do an initial inspection, hasn't actually changed. Same thing, new, rehab, replaced, or ownership changes. The initial inspection must be completed within 3 months of the date open to traffic or the ownership change. And this is kind of a new one here. For phased construction, an initial inspection must be done after any phase in which traffic is placed on a new portion of the structure. So, we're seeing this kind of in the downtown Columbus 70-71 split, where some of the bridges are being opened in phases. So, 2 lanes out of 4 are open. As soon as those first 2 lanes open and we're putting traffic on it, we do an initial inspection of the portion that's open to traffic. And then when, the next 2 lanes open, a year or 2 down the line, another initial inspection is required on those sections that have now been open to traffic. Routine inspections covers all parts of the structure, including probing of substructure units and waters. So that's a key thing to remember, right? That getting to the substructure units in water is required as part of a routine inspection, right? If you cannot safely probe substructure units in water, then we might have an underwater dive bridge on our hands. But just remembering that probing or wading as part of the inspection is something that is required within the scope of routine inspections. The inspection intervals to be determined based on the Ohio RBI, or risk-based inspection policy. That should be nothing new to you all. That is detailed in chapter 4, what the qualifiers for a Ohio 12-month or 24-month routine inspection are. A 24-month routine inspection interval cannot exceed the 24-month per Ohio law. So in a few slides, I'll talk about interval tolerances that have been defined by FHWA and the new NBIS. But we have to remember that Ohio law will supersede if it's more restrictive. So the bridges that have been deemed 24-month routine per the Ohio RBI, they are due by the end of that 24th month, and that is written into Ohio law that specifically routine bridge inspections cannot exceed 24 months. On the other hand, 12-month routine intervals have allowable NBIS tolerance of up to 2 months after the month in which the inspection is due. So in essence, you could go to 14 months before the inspection is considered late for routine 12-month inspections. And like I said, in a few slides, we'll give an example of kind of what that means interval-wise. But again, just remembering that 24-month Ohio routine bridge inspections cannot exceed 24 months. So that's the date you're tracking, right? Especially for the 24 months routine inspections, you cannot exceed that 24th month. Really want to make sure that is clear. Moving into underwater bridge inspections, right? These are the inspections of the underwater portions of the bridge. So it's a little confusing about when underwater should be marked yes, when underwater 930 should be filled out, and that's kind of what I'll explain here. So remembering that wading and probing is considered by Federal Highway or by the definition in the berm as an underwater inspection, but you do not need to fill out underwater inspection required. That is specifically for underwater dive inspection. So I understand that that's not the clearest, right? But remembering during a routine inspection, you are required to probe substructure units if possible. But unless you do underwater dive inspections on your bridge, then the BIR 03 rating should be N for not required. That's specifically for underwater dive. And then also the underwater inspection condition B.C15, the 930 for specifically the underwater components. That's also N unless you have BIR 03 equal to yes. So unless, again, you have an underwater dive inspected bridge, you will have N for BIR 03, underwater inspection required, and BC15, underwater inspection condition. Now, if you are doing that, we do expect you to fill out the probe date field, right? If you are over a waterway, but you don't require underwater dive inspection. So again, that is something we're tracking. If your bridge is over a waterway and it's marked as dive inspection no, then we will be checking to make sure the probe date field is filled out. That basically means you're telling me that you can inspect those substructure units in the water without having an underwater dive. So we want to see that probe date field filled out. That's in with the condition ratings on ASSA-wise. That came from a previous PCA from Federal Highway. So it's very important that if your bridge is over a waterway, but it's not underwater dive required, that you're filling out that probe date field, basically showing us that within at least the last 60 months, you've been able to access and probe those substructure units in the water, checking for scour and making sure the bridge is safe for scour. If you cannot safely wade and probe substructure units in the water at least once every 60 months, that bridge shall receive an underwater dive inspection. So notice that is a shall and not a should. Conversely, if you have a bridge that is marked underwater inspection required, so meaning that it's typically dive inspected underwater, say you have a year in between your dive inspection intervals where the water is extremely low and you can get out there and actually do a probing inspection, you can replace that underwater inspection date with the date that you safely probed the substructure units while still keeping it as a yes for underwater inspection required. Again, that is something that, right, is a federal metric that is tracked. So, if that underwater date changes, we will be, making sure that substructure units in the water were safely inspected. But just keep that in mind that, there have been cases where, water levels have dropped a lot to where, okay, maybe it's typically at, 6 feet and we're never able to probe it, but now it's at, 2 or 3 feet for some reason. We can get out there and do a probing inspection. Then that can, that can replace that underwater inspection date, and you can reset that interval for another 60 or 72 months. So now talking specifically about underwater inspection intervals. Typically, they're going to be at 60 months. That was the NBI underwater inspection interval, and that's how we brought everything over as 60 month. But we could have 24 or 72 month underwater dive inspection cycles if the following apply, right? So 24 month, basically, if any of those underwater or scour or channel related 9 through 0s equal 3 or less, that's going to put you into a 24-month dive inspection cycle. And then for 72 month, if all the above are rated 6 or better and your scour vulnerability is stable, meaning A or B rating there for scour vulnerability, you could potentially have a 72-month cycle for underwater inspection. So, Ohio will have a lot more bridges that are applicable for 72-month cycle than they will for a 24-month cycle. But just be aware of those interval changes. The interval fields, or the required interval fields in ASSAWISE, are auto-calculated, so you don't have the ability to change this on your own. But we've, inputted the these restrictions into those fields, so they will auto-populate based off of these sets of conditions. Moving on to NSTM inspections, or previously fracture critical inspections. So I'm sure most of you are aware that the term fracture critical has been replaced with NSTM. So you'll never forget what a fracture critical inspection is again, because the definition is in the name now, right? Non-redundant steel tension member inspection. So there's your 3 qualifiers for a previously fracture critical member. It's non-redundant, it's steel, and it's in tension, right? So not redundant steel tension members. The requirements haven't changed. It's still a hands-on inspection of all NSTM members, and at the standard interval of 24 months. The big change here is that a 12-month NSTM inspection interval will be required if the new NSTM inspection condition 9 through 0 rating, BC 14, is equal to 4 or lower. So we will have bridges that fall into a 12-month NSTM cycle based off of that new NSTM 9 through 0 being 4 or lower. In a lot of cases, right, the NSTM bridge in poor condition is ultimately controlled by the NSTM members. So don't be surprised if you see 12-month NSTM intervals popping up. There is an option for a 48-month NSTM inspection interval, but that is upon request only to central office, and it must meet a set of 7 different conditions that are outlined on in chapter 4, page 11. So if you think you have NSTM inspections that that are very tedious, very costly, maybe it's over railroads that's very difficult to work with, etc. If it would benefit your organization by possibly having a 48-month NSTM inspection, please check those conditions in chapter 4, page 11, and see if your bridge can meet those conditions, and then those will be submitted on a case-by-case basis to central office for review. But again, the much more common interval that we'll see is 12 months based off of that BC 14 condition rating. So just a few notes on that new condition rating, right? So we didn't have this 9 through 0 before. This is a new 9 through 0 field with SNBI. So right, if your bridge is not NSTM or does not have any NSTMs, right, this will be N. But if you have BIR 02, NSTM yes, no, coded yes, then we do expect BC 14 to be populated. So again, at your next NSTM inspection, please make sure you are coding BC 14 NSTM inspection condition rating. This is specifically for your NSTM members, right? So a bridge with NSTMs in both the superstructure and the substructure report only the lower of the two condition values for the condition of the NSTMs. We do see that from time to time, but a lot of times we see, NSTMs just in the superstructure or just in the substructure. An important note that we added to the manual: if during your routine inspection, maybe you're not doing an NSTM inspection, but if you see NSTM condition ratings that are not accurate with the previous NSTM condition rating, you can possibly update that 9 through 0 rating for BC 14 without actually doing a full NSTM inspection. So just reinforcing that you don't actually have to be doing an NSTM, a full NSTM inspection to, possibly, lower that rating if necessary. And then an important note, and this is something that Ohio has added specifically, similar to, scour controlling substructure. If you're, basically what we want is, depending on where your NSTM is, whether that's in the superstructure or the substructure, you will not have superstructure or substructure condition ratings that are higher than the NSTM inspection condition rating, right? So basically what that means, right, if say you have a pony truss bridge where your NSTM rating for your floor beams or truss members is a 5, that means your superstructure rating cannot be higher than a 5, right? Ultimately, those NSTM members should control the overall superstructure or substructure condition rating. So you could have cases where those BC 14 is higher than BC 02 or 03, but you will never have BC 14 lower than BC 02 or BC 03. Okay, a new inspection type for us here for SNBI that we will be using a decent amount, especially for bridge impacts, is damage inspections. So the key with damage inspection, or when to choose damage inspection type, is when it's an unscheduled inspection to assess structural damage, and that can be resulting from either environmental factors like flooding or a tornado, or things we would see in Ohio. But mostly, right, it's human actions. People keep running into our bridges. So that's where we have seen damage inspection coded the most so far since March, right? If you have a bridge impact that you are called out to, whether that's by state police or local police or, the public or whomever, if you're going out there just to look at the part that's damaged, right, we're not choosing routine inspection. We're not choosing special inspection if it's the first time you're going out, to see, the impact. We're choosing damage inspection type. And then, a lot of times, right, for a damage inspection, a critical finding is also being filled out. Not saying that it always has to be, but right, if the rating of the bridge is now coming down to a 2, or you're going to restrict, on top or on bottom, right, during the damage inspection, then we want that critical finding form filled out. In-depth inspections, not much has changed here with the previous guidance, but now we can actually code these as in-depth inspections, right? We have the choice to do so. So previously we didn't have a inspection type for this, so a lot of times it was coded as special inspection, and we want to get away from coding in-depth or complex bridge inspections as special inspections, and I'll talk about special inspections on the next screen or on the next slide. But if you have in-depth or complex inspections on suspension, cable stay, movable bridges, maybe post-tension bridges, things that are different or unique from our typical bridges, we want that inspection type coded as in-depth. If you are doing a more close-up or specialized inspection on those special parts of the bridge, We want that again coded as in-depth, not as special going forward. So special inspections, this is an inspection scheduled at the discretion of the bridge owner used to monitor a particularly known or suspected deficiency or to monitor special details or unusual characteristics that does not necessarily have defects. So again, to summarize special inspections, you're looking at a specific part of the bridge for a certain reason. So more often than not, it's because, right, you have a localized deficiency that you want to keep an eye on, and I'm going to go out, every, at a different scale than routine and look specifically at that, portion of the bridge that has that localized deficiency. That's a special inspection, right? It's not, if we're doing a in-depth inspection on movable components of a bridge every 60 months, that's not a special inspection. That's, in-depth on those movable components every 60 months. It may or may not have a designated interval. So again, if this is something you're going out to, kind of one time and you might not go back, you don't have to have an interval in there. The interval for special inspections is not auto-calculated, so it can be determined by the program manager. So one of the most common examples, right, is I have a routine inspection every 12 months, but I'm worried about something at the bridge, whether it's impact damage that has not been arrested yet, or scour that we want to keep checking on, something like that. If you're going out, every 3 months, every 6 months, something like that, every month to look at just a specific portion of the bridge, then you could make that interval, 3 months or 6 months. But again, if you code an interval in there, you will be, held to that as, as the interval that you have designated. So, special inspections are now something that Federal Highway is going to be tracking, kind of just similar to NSTMs or underwater. So if you put a interval in there, we're going to be checking for, a special inspection every however many months that you designated in your interval. The key thing to remember with this type of inspection for special inspections is that Federal Highway wants to see a procedure on file pertaining to what was the special inspection. So, what specific part of the bridge are we looking at? How will it be accessed? Why and who will be doing the inspecting, etc. So special inspections require procedures on file in AssetWise. If we see these inspection types coded and can't figure out on AssetWise, why this was done, or we can't find the procedure, we will be asking you to add that to AssetWise as part of our QA process. It's relatively loose as what applies. Like I have a bullet here saying, right, it could be inside the inspection notes or it could be a standalone file. Again, if you're, if you think it's going to be a one and done or relatively, not something you're going to do on an interval, maybe it just goes into the inspection notes of that special inspection report. What were we, why were we doing this? How was it accessed, etc. But again, if this is something that you could see doing every 6 months, or something where it is scheduled on a routine, I would recommend having a standalone kind of, Word document that you upload to the files in AssetWise, similar to NSTM inspection procedures, just saying, the scope of the inspection and how it will be done. Next, we have scour monitoring inspections. These are performed to determine the safety of a bridge after a hydraulic event or as determined by a scour plan of action. So typically, we would recommend, if you have bridges that are susceptible to high water or overtopping, that we would go out and check those bridges after high water events. If you do something like that, that would be considered a scour monitoring inspection. Also, if scour vulnerability for your structure, which I'll talk about in a few slides, is coded as scour vulnerable, basically the new scour critical, you know, coatings of C or D. A lot of times as part of a scour plan of action, you know, the owner will, you know, kind of determine, okay, we're going to do scour monitoring inspections every, you know, so many months just to make sure our scour conditions haven't changed, etc. And then lastly, with inspection types, I just kind of wanted to touch on the 6.2 fields in asset-wise. So again, once you click on the inspection type box under inspection types, it'll populate that repeated field group, items BIE 01 to 12 for that inspection type. So you'll never have to fill out 01. That will just say whichever inspection type you chose. BIE 02 and 03, those are our inspection date fields now, right? BIE 03 is the new NBI 90. So the first thing you should do when you open our inspection report is fill out inspection begin date, and if you're going to complete that inspection that day, the inspection completion date. BIE 03 is the date we are tracking for compliance. So please, 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 please make sure that you're filling out BIE 02 and BIE 03 every inspection. Ideally, you would not be able to submit reports for approval without those filled out, but we're having issues with asset-wise required fields for those not actually working properly, and that's something that Bentley is currently actively working on. You'll see those red boxes show up if you leave them blank, but that should then not allow you to submit that report for review. But that functionality is not working properly, which was news to us as of a month or so ago. So please, just, you know, the first thing you should do is add your inspection dates. Just get that as part of your inspection workflow. Fill out your inspection dates first. BIE 04, Nationally Certified Bridge Inspector number. We will be assigning those. I know we've said that in the past. We're just kind of, you know, Bentley is actively working on that this quarter, where that number will be associated with the user's profile, similarly to a PE number, to where that inspector opens up a report and it auto-populates whatever number we assign. So we haven't had a rush, you know, felt the rush to assign those numbers, strictly because we haven't had the functionality to actually implement them yet. So I know a lot of people ask about the National Certified Bridge Inspector number. Don't worry about that at the moment. We will, you know, get those to you sometime before full SNBI is required in 2028. BIE 05 to 07, so inspection interval, inspection due date, and risk-based inspection interval method. Those are all auto-populated based off of if they are required or not. So routine, NSTM, underwater, right? Those intervals are going to auto-populate for you based off of our method 1 qualifiers, so you don't have to really worry about those. The only thing, you know, only time you really would be filling out BIE 05 is, like I said, for something like special, where you want to set your own interval as to, or scour monitoring as like when you want to go back out and do those inspections. Quick note for reviewers, or, you know, people approving reports, BIE 08 and BIE 10 should be the date that you are doing the review. So quality control, right? You know, this is something Ohio does specifically, right? We require PE review of each inspection report. So that's in essence a quality control. The only time you would not fill out BIE 08 as a reviewer is if you are the person that is the team leader on the inspection, right? So if you did the inspection and you're reviewing the inspection, then that's not a quality control, it's the same person, right? But more often than not, a different team leader does the inspection, submits it to a, you know, someone else for review. If that's the case, then fill out the quality control date as, you know, a new person looking at this inspection report. And then data update date is basically, you know, when will this, you know, we're updating the data, you know, as soon as you approve the report, it updates the data, right? So BIE 08 and 10 should be data review. BIE 11, any procedures specific to that inspection, even if it's something as easy as, waiters needed for this inspection or something, right? Those notes can go into BIE 11, and BIE 12 is any special equipment that is used for that inspection type. It's a multi-select option, so you can choose, multiple different tools or equipment. Touching on when inspection procedures are required. This means that inspection procedures for these inspection types must be on AssetWise, right? That's, relatively new, not so new on the state system, but, for all Ohio users, NSTM, underwater dive, special or in-depth, these are what required procedures. We want those procedures to be on AssetWise so that, when Federal Highway asks for them, they can access them relatively easily. You have to have these in your bridge file regardless. We want to move more towards AssetWise being, the public facing and the Federal Highway facing bridge file, right? So inspection procedures on file in AssetWise for those 4 inspection types. And, they include, but are not limited to, location and what's to be expected, right? Inspection method, is it visual, hands-on, weighting, etc., risk factors, inspection personnel and equipment needed, right? Similar things that we've already defined for NSTM in the past. So the big change there is special inspections needing inspection procedures, but basically just, how, who, and what will be inspected, right? Okay, so moving on to the NHI or the NBIS inspection interval tolerances. I know we've tried to get this information out multiple times and it's kind of confusing, so just wanted to touch on it again. There are built-in acceptable tolerances in the NBIS for 24-month or greater intervals and then less than 24-month intervals. So the 24-month or greater inspection interval tolerance is up to 3 months after the month in which the inspection is due. So we can use this for NSTM, underwater dive, in-depth. We cannot, again, use this for Ohio routine 24-month. We cannot, exceed 24 months for strictly routines per Ohio law. But for the other inspection types, we're allowed, since they are not routine inspections, we can use this 3-month tolerance. So, an example there, if you have an NSTM inspection that was done on January 1st, 2025, your next inspection is due April 30th, 2027 for a 24-month. Why is that? Because it's 3 months after the month in which the inspection is due. So January 1st, you get that whole month of January as the month in which the bridge was inspected. Then you get 3 more months. So January, February, March, April 30th, 2027. So 3 months after the month in which the inspection is due for 24-month or greater non-routine inspection tolerances. Now for less than 24-month tolerances, so what could apply to this? Ohio 12-month routine, 12-month NSTM, you have 2 months after the month in which the inspection is due. So using the same example, January 1st, 2025 is the routine 12-month inspection date. The next routine date must be completed, or routine inspection must be completed by March 31st, 2026. So how do we get there? End of, you get that whole month of January for month in which the inspection was done, plus 2 months. So January and then February, March, end of March, March 31st, 2026. Okay, moving into chapter 5, qualifications. Again, like I said at the beginning of this, there are a lot of changes to training and qualifications, the main one being refresher training here. So the new NBIS, as most of you should know, took effect on June 6, 2024. From that date on, all alternate bridge inspection trainings must be formally approved by Federal Highway. So that basically, hurts Ohio as a state, which did a lot of their own in-house inspection training. Ohio or ODOT taught, right, its own comprehensive training and has always taught its own bridge inspection refresher training. Post June 6, 2024, we no longer can do that unless the training goes through a rigorous approval process by Federal Highway. So we are, currently working on, in the process of getting our level 1 and level 2 updated and reapproved. We do plan on eventually having an in-house refresher, but the focus is on level 1, level 2 first. Basically, the big thing here, unfortunately, is that we can, post June 6, 2024, 1-day refresher training, which, ODA had done for decades, is no longer an option. So current approved courses for comprehensive inspection training, so in essence, the level 1, level 2. So currently, post June 6, 2024, right now, the only approved courses for comprehensive training are the 2-week NHI and the 1-week NHI for PEs. Your level 1, level 2 is not invalid if you took it before June 6, 2024. We just can't continue to teach that course until we have updated it per SNBI and got it reapproved by Federal Highway. So we are a majority of the way through that, through fixing the course, and then we are sometime this fall, we will submit those documents, the full course documents, to Federal Highway for approval, which, giving them some time to review. We're hoping for a resumption of level 1 and level 2 training by spring of next year. So refresher training, again, this was, quite the unfortunate change of the new NBIS, given that we were a state that always taught its own refresher training. Up until June 6, 2024, we were able to determine what met bridge inspection refresher training, right? So, most of you who have been working in Ohio should know, right, that, we did 1-day refreshers in person up until COVID, a handful of times each year. And every year we were updating that course, what we taught in that 1 day based off of what was applicable at that time. Then we had the online refresher, basically post-COVID until June 6th of 2024. Whichever way you shake it, if you took those trainings, they were only 1 day. They're only good for 6 to 7 hours of training. So the big change was that the new NBIS requires 18 hours of refresher training instead of, it wasn't defined before, so we were doing a 1 day. Now it's defined as 18 hours, which is 3 days. And so, once every 5 years after your comprehensive training, that hasn't changed. But the 18 hours, right, is a big change. And currently the only approved refresher training nationwide is the NHI 3-day bridge inspection refresher training. So, if some of you remember, that's why ODOT tried to do a big push early 2024 to get people up to 18 hours. We had our 1 day refresher, but we also, allowed multiple different, free NHI online courses to count as refresher training. Because again, we wanted our users to get above that 18 hours because we knew that it was going to be a challenge. And once June 6, 2024 hit, we would have a lot of users that didn't have, 18 hours. They would have, the 6 or 6.5 that was allowed until the new NBIS as refresher training. But now, once you need 18 hours, that wasn't going to be enough, right? So, we are very aware of this issue, and we will now start bringing in the as many NHI refresher training courses as possible, with the intent of filling those up with, specifically the Ohio users that need to get above 18 hours. So most of the ODOT people, ODOT inspectors and program managers are above 18 hours because we were doing, annual ODOT inspector meetings, district bridge engineer meetings, things like that were able to count for refresher training. But, we knew that like our county system, our municipal system might have, would have the most people that weren't attending those annual ODOT only events, that would need to get up to 18 hours. So, we've scheduled our first ever NHI refresher course in this state for December. I was able to easily fill that up with 27 county individuals. And currently right now, we cannot, because of NHI updating some of their internal systems, our LTAP cannot literally schedule NHI refresher trainings. But once, that period, once that opens up again, sometime in the fall, we will work with LTAP and Federal Highway to get as many of those refresher trainings as possible. And then I will be working with, Mark Sherman and Omar and the counties and the munis to make sure we're getting, everyone that needs to get up to 18 hours into a refresher training as quickly as possible. So again, a known issue that, we just have to work on as a state because we were, always kind of doing our own refresher training, right? So we will all get compliant together on that one. Okay, so now moving into chapter 7 here. This is, right, the full inventory chapter. So it includes, this is the new inventory manual rolled into, the inspection and inventory manual. It includes full SNBI inventory. It also includes Ohio inventory fields that we will continue to collect. And what we've tried to do to make it, as seamless or as, in a logical order as possible, we've inserted, the Ohio fields into the SNBI fields where applicable. And that's, on the right here, this photo is kind of showing a small, example of this, where, all of our Ohio fields previously were numbered based off of NBI, format, right? The NBI was just numerical. So a lot of our Ohio, fields were 3-digit fields. We knew that it wouldn't really look right if we had, the SNBI inventory, like the way that they've set that up, their nomenclature, and then, 3-digit numbers mixed in with this new, B standing for bridge, and then dot, whichever the section is, ID, in this case, identification, and then field number 01, 2, 3 of that section. So we wanted it to look relatively similar. So again, I know it's a bit of a mouthful there, seeing the decimals after the first numerical decimal, but that is, basically that shows that that's an ODOT only field. And I think that's, the best way that we could, kind of make a seamless transition into this new SNBI nomenclature with our Ohio fields. So the overall look and feel of the inventory chapter is going to be very similar to SNBI. You can kind of see that on the right, where you have the ID first, your frequency, whether that's, an initial, inventory coding or every inspection, like 9 through 0 numbers are every inspection. The format, and then the max number of characters. Please keep an eye out for max characters and if it requires decimals or not, because AssetWise has some controls or some user controls in there to where if it requires a 1 decimal place and you don't put a decimal in there, it's not going to let you populate that field. So, right, if you have bridge length and you have 30 feet, but it requires 1 decimal, then just put, 0.0. But if it's not letting you populate a field, that means that your format is not correct. Specifications will show the applicable coding choices. The commentary section will give guidance on how to code the field. So, and then we have an example section that will have some coding examples. What we wanted to do, right, is make it, Ohio, facing. Basically, we wanted the examples, the commentary, the specifications to be as Ohio specific as possible. And that's where you'll see most of the changes from the SNBI, is that we've updated that commentary and those examples when applicable to be, better for Ohio users. Something to please remember is that, we tried to populate as much SNBI as we could from the previous NBI, but just because a field's populated does not mean that it's accurate. So please make sure to review populated SNBI fields for accuracy. And then anything that came over with a T temporary, it needs to be updated to the correct field. So basically that means that the translator, could in essence assume it was one of a couple fields, but it couldn't, specifically choose the exact field, right? So like, for instance, you'll see, structure material will come over as temporary, say if it's concrete, because it doesn't know whether to choose cast in place or precast, right? So you'll just have to remove all those, choose the proper code for anything that comes over as T temporary. Okay, so getting into condition ratings. Something that I'm sure most of you care about the most. What we're showing on this screen is ODOT's rendition of SNBI Table 20, which basically documents how to rate, overall 9 through 0 condition ratings. So please take a really good look at this table and just try to understand what exactly it's saying in relation to what the severity means, as you get lower into chapter 7, as you're looking at specifically, decks, superstructure, substructure, etc. And then you start talking about defects and are they minor, moderate, major, are they isolated or widespread, etc. Because this table is in essence just a guide for the rest of the chapter as where you should relatively land on the 9 through 0 scale. As you get into chapter 7, it's broken up by component and then material type within that component, right? So you'll have deck component first, and then that will talk about, concrete decks, timber decks, steel decks, and then you'll get into, wearing surface, and then superstructure. And superstructure, just again, you'll have tables and rating guidance for concrete superstructures, and then pre-stressed box beams, and then steel. And so it's, all of your guidance is broken up by, again, component type and then material type. So there's lots of rating guidance that follows this table in chapter 7, but this is just the overall. And so what I want to discuss here, and I, briefly, and we talked about this as soon as this came out in 2022, we did a webinar on condition ratings. We told everyone that we think this is going to lower condition ratings. And what we have seen in practice so far is that assumption was correct. We're going to see a lot of movement from 7s to 6s, 6s to 5s, 5s to 4s. Kind of that middle range there is where we're going to start seeing, lowering of ratings, and that's not because the bridge just got worse overnight. It's because we're recalibrating to a new rating scale. So minor, moderate, major severity. So in essence is exactly condition state 2, condition state 3, condition state 4, for those of you who do element level inspections. But what I wanted to kind of get at with that is that moderate deficiencies are relatively common, right? A moderate deficiency is measurable section loss, which we will see pretty much anywhere that water can sit, right? or a spall in concrete, which we see all the time, right? So it's relatively easy to get to a moderate deficiency. And if you notice this table here, we don't have any indication of moderate deficiencies in the 9, 8, 7 level. So again, you know, this is kind of where I'm saying we're going to see 7s coming to 6s, because if you have, you know, more than 1% relatively, so isolated moderate is already at the 6th level of this table. So when you're seeing, you know, measurable isolated deficiencies, we've defined that as, you know, a few areas over the structure, you're probably going to be in that 6 range. So it's going to be easier to get to a 6 now, and it's going to be easier to get to a 5 now. So we just have to recalibrate kind of what we, you know, thought the 6 was, what we thought a 5 was, etc. What I want to make, lastly, bring attention to is the difference between a 5 and a 4, right? So we're still at, is the strength and performance of the member affected? Yes, to get to a 4. So, you know, you could have major deficiencies on your structure, and if it's, you know, determined to not be seriously affecting the strength and performance of the structure, you can stay in that 5 level instead of coming down to a 4. So touching on location, extent, and severity. When determining the overall condition rating of an item, consider the defect severity and location, which may govern over the quantity of a defect. So the extent, right, is defined by isolated, some, and widespread. Those are terms straight from Federal Highway. Severity is defined by minor, moderate, or major, or CS2, CS3, CS4 for element level rating. And again, defects in higher stress zones should carry a bit more weight, right? So for example, bottom flange at midspan, beam web or ends over the supports, deck slab culvert, you know, under the travel lanes as opposed to the edges or the ends, right? Just, you know, it's on the inspector to kind of understand where they're at when they're at a more critical area for deficiencies, right? Structural review. So again, this is kind of when you've reached a, you know, a 4 on your component ratings, or, you know, CS4 primary elements for element level. A structural review is recommended. So that may include, you can see those 4 bullet points there that, you know, might be part of a structural review. But basically, we just, you know, want to make sure when you've got CS4 for your primary structural members, or your GA drops to a 4, that, you know, you at least are checking as to why, to make sure that, you know, nothing else needs to be done, or, you know, repair, replacement, load rating possibly required, etc. So a key bullet point here that is different than how we were operating when we first implemented element level. So this is mainly for those doing element level. Unless you have made a repair or, you know, added capacity to an element, you know, condition and element level rating should remain the same even after a review, right? If the condition is still the same as it was, you know, nothing was fixed, no capacity was added, you know, we want that CS4 to stay CS4 because it's objectively worse than CS3, right? I think our old guidance was, once a review was created, move that CS4 to CS3. We no longer want that, because we want to identify that CS4, you know, as worse than condition state 3, right? So unless something was fixed or capacity was added after review, keep those, you know, ratings the same. And then lastly, this does not directly indicate that the bridge is required to be posted. So just because you're doing a structural review doesn't mean you're automatically going to post the bridge. A load rating may be part of that review, but again, the bridge being posted is not a qualifier for, you know, a rating to be a 4 or a review to be done. So a couple examples I want to touch on quickly about, you know, situations that we will see, common situations where, we're probably going to be having 5s or lower on the 9 through 0 scale. Kind of changes to rating guidance here. The one big one is deck or slab edges. In previous iterations of our guidance, we were even saying just discount the edges completely. That's no longer the case. So we need to accurately rate the overall component based off of the full structure. We're not discounting edges anymore. That also goes for fascia beams, right? We're not discounting fascia bridge beams as not as important. They affect the overall rating just the same. So, a case like this, we see, in the picture, very, very common to see slab or deck edges with CS4 or major deficiencies because of, drainage issues. If we see something like that, we want it accurately rated as, a major deficiency. If you've got, full 360 exposure of rebar, primary bars, or even if you just have, CS3 or moderate type spalls, that's going to affect your overall component rating. So if you think about a slab or a deck that has, even if we just say moderate spalls, for the full length of the deck edge, that's going to be in the, range of a 5 on the component scale. So that's something where I think typically we have discounted in the past, wouldn't have came lower than a 6. Now you're going to see those, edge specific issues, if they are widespread, moving your bridge down to a 5. I think we can safely say, right, that this condition that we're seeing in this photo, even if it's widespread, isn't affecting the capacity of the structure until it gets, until that spall creeps into where it's seeing live load closer to the edge lines. But in this case, right, I don't think a 4 is necessary, but we're definitely at a 5 now on situations like this instead of a 6. Moving on to substructures, big change here is that back wall is now included in the substructure condition ratings. So we never considered back wall in with substructure, but now it is defined as part of the substructure per SNBI. So if you see, spalls in your back wall, a lot of times due to, seized joints above or something of that nature, that is now affecting your substructure 9 through 0 rating. So, in situations where I've seen, spalled back walls and a bridge still rated as high as a 7 sometimes, you're going to be down into that 6-5 range, depending on extent severity, because they are now considered part of the back wall. Another thing too, for steel piles, we put a lot of that, advanced component rating of a 4 for steel guidance. We put a lot of that in the rating tables of the actual, component that we're talking about. So either steel superstructures or steel substructures. So please make sure to, look at that stuff in the manual. But, we're no longer discounting, fascias. We want, steel substructures that are not encased, that have through holes, to have a lot of weight. We want these rated as 3s. We want them rated as criticals. So please make sure that you are accurately rating steel substructures as 3s or 2s with corrosion holes in the piles. Next, I want to quickly touch on scour appraisals. So we have this guidance out there. It's been out there. So I'm not going to get too in depth, but again, I want to make sure everyone understands what a scour appraisal is. They are required for every NBIS bridge over water. And a scour appraisal takes into account observed scour and estimated scour. So not just your overall scour rating, but also the estimated portion is the additional part of a scour appraisal that we need to have in AssetWise. So where do you get that estimated scour? That's either from a standalone scour evaluation or a scour assessment. And so this is where the new level 1, level 2, level 3 comes in, because it is our new form of scour assessment. So to have a full scour appraisal, you either need to have your scour ratings, right? Your 9 through 0s and your elements, that's your observed scour, and either a scour evaluation that's done typically during design or after the fact, basically estimating what your, acceptable levels of scour are, or a scour assessment. So we had a scour assessment checklist in our old manual. If you have done that and have that on file for a bridge before January 1st, 2023, that's acceptable as your scour assessment to be uploaded to AssetWise. But in the vast majority of cases, we don't have that. And if you don't have a scour evaluation, that's when we want you to do the level 1, 2, and 3 that we created on the scour appraisal form in AssetWise. The key thing here, if your scour assessment determines that your bridge is rated either at C or D for BAP03, which is scour vulnerability, that is in essence the new scour critical. So that would mean a scour plan of action is required to be on AssetWise for scour ratings of, or for scour vulnerability ratings of C or D. Guidance for this is in Chapter 4 and Appendix D and H of the new inspection manual. So kind of showing you how to properly fill this out, right? If you have a standalone scour evaluation as part of your appraisal, that's kind of this number 1 here, and everything there will be, uploaded and filled in based off of that standalone scour evaluation. But if you don't have an evaluation and you have an assessment, that's where you get down to number 2. So you will either, this drop down here, you'll either code O if you have a previous documented assessment on file, so kind of the old checklist prior to 2023, or you'll have, levels 1, levels 2, or level 3 of the new assessment there. So if you are doing the the ODOT level 1, 2, and 3 for an assessment, you'll kind of just choose in that drop down. Once you're complete, did you do just level 1 to get your recommended vulnerability rating, or level 2 or level 3, and you'll fill the date in which you did that, right? And then the levels of the scour assessment, everything's in there calculated. If if you get through level 1 and it says you have either A or B, you're done. If it says continue to level 2, you go to level 2, etc. Next, we have the updated appendices. So I want to just show the new appendices in the manual. We've got a lot of different updates per SNBI here. So your ownership responsibilities are in Appendix B and C. Scour appraisal documentation and the full guidance there is Appendix D. NSTM inspection procedures checklist, basically an example. NSTM inspection procedure, Appendix E. Updated fatigue prone details per the new AASHTO guidelines is Appendix F. Underwater inspection procedure checklist, similarly to Appendix E for NSTM, but for underwater is Appendix G. Appendix H is going to be updated on the first manual revision, but that should be scour. Critical should be removed, and so that's a generic plan of action form that's in there. The version that ended up in the manual was not the SNBI version. So we have a new version of it that I will be adding to the website shortly. If you need a plan of action, you want to use a generic standalone form, we'll have that on the website, and then I will put the new form into Appendix H on our first review. Cross-channel measurements for cross-channel profiles, still there for your guidance. Overheight steel bridge strike form. So if this is a good form to take out and fill out if you have a overhead bridge impact. Appendix K is completely new. That's basically how to defines how to work with the railroads when you need to contact someone, etc. And then Appendix L, we've got some comprehensive SNBI coding examples. And so those are mainly for Section 4 features. We have a few different examples of how to code the features with screenshots for a simple example or for something over many features. So please, if you have questions with specifically the feature section of the SNBI coding, please reference Appendix L. And then we also have an updated snooper operations manual in Appendix M. So I kind of just touched on that there about the comprehensive examples for Section 4 and Appendix L. And so that wraps up our manual webinar. We will have another webinar in this series for specifically SNBI inventory coding. So please make sure you catch that webinar as well. And depending on the feedback we get from these, we may do more of these webinars based off of what people want guidance on. So with that, I'll open it up to some questions, and thank you all for attending.